I'm Julia Sain. I'm the Executive Director of Disability Rights and Resources. We are an organization that covers Mecklenburg, Union, Gaston, and Cabarrus counties. We are experts on a lot of the laws that pertain to people with disabilities. And we are here to talk today about an hour and a half on the Americans with Disabilities Act and what does that mean to you. The training today is the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II. You're going to find out what that means, and I've specifically designated this for health care. I've done a lot of ADA training over the years, and I'm talking about probably thousands and thousands of people all over the Southeast and all over the country. And so I always start with this slide because it's very important for us to all be singing off the same page. When you are asked, or I am asked, an ADA question, and I listen to the question, was I discriminated against at work? Do I have to provide a sign language interpreter for this patient who's come in? I answer it correctly every time, and now you will be able to also. And that's the truth, and that makes you very crazy, and I understand that. But if it was cut and dried, here's what would happen. When Congress passed the ADA, they had two choices. They could make it prescriptive, which means that every time somebody who's deaf darkens your door, you'll whip out an interpreter. Or they make it interactive, which means that you have a conversation with the person. There are extenuating circumstances, if you want to call it that, so that there is a method to them having to, you having to have a conversation with the person to decide what is it you have to do. We are available free of charge. Our phone number is on your handout to call and ask us if you have a question. Let me give you some background as to how we wound up here. A little bit of history about this. I'm sure some of you have heard of Section 504. Raise your hand if you've heard of Section 504. Right, especially if you've ever worked in the school system or you have a child with a disability in the school system. Section 504 of what? It's like Title IX. Title IX of what? And how many titles are there? You know, we hear Section 504. Well, it's Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. This was signed into law, as it says, in 1973, and it was vetoed by President Nixon. It went back to Congress. Congress overrode the veto. And on September 23rd of 73, Nixon had to sign it into law. It had a lot of information in it. It's quite thick. It covered everything from vocational rehabilitation services, Division of Services for the Blind, a lot of things. It also talked about Section 504. Section 504 is only 39 words, and here it is. No otherwise qualified handicap, and I'm going to stop right here. There's two H words in the ADA that we never say, handicapped and historic. Make my teeth sweat, both of them. Now, today we're not going to talk about historic because you're not worrying about buildings and trying to tell me you don't have to put a ramp on something because it's old. But we are going to talk about the word handicapped. It is in the law. The law was written in 1973. I've got a feeling there were other bad words in laws that were written in 1973. Today, if this law was being written, it would say citizens with disabilities or people with disabilities. We use person-first language where we say the person first, person, co-worker, citizen, employee, patron, patient, with or who, and then you throw something at the end like uses a wheelchair, is deaf, you know, reads Braille, whatever. But this was 1973, and I look around the room and know that some of you weren't alive then, and so I will give you a little slack and let you know that back in the day we said things we shouldn't have said. No otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall solely by reason of that handicap be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. How many of you work somewhere that receives federal money? All y'all. Everybody raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand.
Everybody does.
Okay. So here's what this says. If you were king of the forest in 1973, whatever you do now, if you were in charge of all things Gaston County in 1973, and you would have read this and you would have said, okay, that means that anything that we do Gaston County, has to be accessible to everybody or nobody. If it's not available to everybody, we got to quit doing it, because that's basically what this says. It's everybody or nobody. And back in the day, and back in 1970, about 77, I got a job going around the state doing 504 training. I was 12. I was a child prodigy. Thank you all who didn't laugh and were shocked at that. The guys in the back, thank you, thank you. You look at me like you, yeah. No, I went around and taught how to comply with this in 1977. My first job out of college. I'll let you do the math. So, we went around and talked to municipalities, and we said, you need a 504 compliance officer. It's not required, but it's a darn good idea. And that way you can figure out what you have one person whose job it is to find out what all of your program services and activities are. And then you can decide if you're doing them in an accessible fashion. And then it's everybody or nobody. And if your buildings aren't wheelchair accessible, how are you going to fix them? And if you have a program, but you don't allow deaf people in because you refuse to hire an interpreter, what are you going to do about it? And by the time this was completed, nobody was going to be accessible the next day. We get that. But nothing new was supposed to be built that wasn't accessible, and no new programs were supposed to be provided that weren't inclusive. And all God's children would be happy, and I would be out of a job. And here I am in 2016, and the ADA reads very much like this because people ignored them the first time. Something about Congress that cracks me up. They think if they say it, we do it. That is not true, of course, and they found that out. But at the time, they said, if you receive federal financial assistance, you've got to make sure that all your programs and services and activities are accessible. If you do something without federal money, you can do whatever you want to. So when the city of Concord, Kannapolis together decided to start the CK Rider system, which is a public transportation bus system, in 2004, and I said to the head of the transit department, 80% of your bus stops are not wheelchair accessible. You can't do that. That means that you have a program that's not accessible. And he said, well, it's too late now, sister. We've already gotten it done. Oh, not good. So I called up the Federal Department of Transportation that paid for this mess. And I said, you have paid for a segregated discriminatory system. And the guy called the head of, who shall remain nameless, called the head in Concord and Kannapolis and asked him, was I telling the truth? And the guy said yes. And the guy said, and she said that I can't do that. And the man from Washington said, of course you can do that. You just have a bake sale to pay us back all the money we gave you, and all is fair. But you can't use our money to discriminate, but you can use somebody else's. We're good with that. Anybody thinks there's free federal money has never dealt with federal money or doesn't know the definition of free. You can do anything you want to with private money, but if you take federal money, you have to follow federal laws. So this was the law in 1973. It is not, it was based on the 64 Civil Rights Act. What I was going to tell you is it's not a quota bill, and it's not a building code. Yes, there's how high, how wide, how deep, how many for somebody in a wheelchair. But it's based on the 64 Civil Rights Act. And so these words are in the law. Segregation, integration, separate but equal. If you were alive in 1960s, fewer and fewer of you I'm talking to now, and you hear those three words, segregation, integration, and separate but equal, I guess that's more than three words, and it hits you in the pit of your stomach, now take that feeling and put it in a wheelchair. Ta-da! ADA. All right? You cannot have a program that's segregated. Everybody or nobody. We're going to talk about, you're going to see that again. When you leave here, you're going to know two things. That depends, and everybody or nobody. And my job will have been done. I told you that we're going to talk about Title II, and in order to tell you that, you probably would like to know what the other titles are and where you fit in. Well, the first one is Title I, one, and it's employment. Now, here's the deal. I'm not talking to human resources right now, but I'll bet I'm talking to supervisors. I hope you've had your Title I training. It ranks right up there with active shooter and OSHA and bloodborne pathogens, trust me. So it's a Monday morning and you're sitting there as a supervisor and one of your employees comes in who doesn't use a wheelchair or anything like that, and you say, hey, how are you doing? And the employee says, dreading going to work today, I dread sitting in that chair for 8 hours. And you don't know what to do next, you haven't had your Title I training. And trust me, you can screw it up. I encourage you all to have your Title I training because as we speak, I have more cases open in employment than I do anything else. Every time I have had to, anytime a complaint that's EEOC, Title I, it goes to EEOC. Every time it exacerbates up to EEOC and we have sat with the person with a disability, we've won. And so one of the problems we have with Title I is that HR says nobody from outside the company can come in and talk to the, mediate. Like, well, you know what? If y'all knew what you were doing, this wouldn't have happened, and so carry on. And it goes to EEOC and we win. So if you don't know what to do in the scenario that I suggested, or if somebody comes along and says, hey, I need a reserved parking space with my name on it, and you don't know how to react to that, then you're probably going to need Title I training. Ken Henderson is in your Human Resources Department for Gaston County. He's also the ADA coordinator for Gaston County, and he can make that happen. Title II is state and local government, and that's you. That's also where 504 came in. So back in the day, when Congress passed and President Nixon signed into law Section 504 of the Rehab Act, they thought we're done. And then in 1988, 89, when Congress was taking testimony to find out what is it that people with disabilities need in the community, and they expected to hear, we don't have employment rights, and we can't get into mom's diner, and we can't get in, the lawyer won't provide an interpreter, and my doctor makes my daughter sign. Congress did not expect to have people come in and say, my town just built a library and it's got 12 steps and I can't get in, because they fixed that in '73. And so the fact that there were municipalities, who shall remain nameless, who refused to comply in '73, Congress decided to, okay, they don't understand 39 words, let's give them an entire title and put penalties in it. There are two places in the law where, when I talk to people who work for municipalities and we start talking about what they need to do for accessibility, and they say, but that doesn't seem fair, and I go, well, you shouldn't have ticked them off in '73. Or they say, we can't afford to do that, and I say, well, if you've put $1 a day, $1 aside a day since September 23rd, 1973, how much money have you got in the bank? It's called risk management. It's like working for 70 years and then expecting somebody else to pay your retirement because you didn't plan. I don't think you're going to come crying to me, and municipalities don't get to come crying to Congress about it either. And this is you, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more. The third part is public accommodations. When you and I hear the word public, we think government, because we think public school, public libraries, public bus system. But Congress thinks the public means people. So what this means is places you go and spend your money that are not government supported. So there are 12 categories, but there's a great old big long list of examples. Everything from, like I said, mom and pop's diner and the shoe repair and lawyers and doctors and gyms and movie theaters, and it goes on and on. There's only two things so far since I've been doing ADA and 504 training that would look like they are Title III that didn't fit in. One was a Tupperware party at a woman's house. Money exchanged hands, but we couldn't figure out that was actually going to fall under one of the categories. And a Lamaze class in somebody's basement, because it wasn't affiliated with a hospital or anything like that. Everything else that has come to me where somebody has paid for something, it has fallen under one of the categories. You have a church and you say, oh, well, Churches are exempt from the ADA. And you know what I say? That depends. Good girls over here. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Let's say that you're having a concert and it's not a love offering, so you have to buy a ticket to get in, and somebody who's deaf and they buy a ticket and they say, I want you to pay for an interpreter. You can't say, but the church is exempt, because at that moment, for the life of that event, you are a public accommodation because you are like a theater. Ooh. And if you want to ask me about your daycare, we can talk about that. And if it's a voting site, that's a whole nother Oprah show. Okay. Title IV is telecommunications. You don't have to worry about that. That said that in 1992, the state would have something called a relay system set up. You pay for it on every phone bill that you pay. It's like 11 cents or 13 cents. And it means that there are relay operators, so somebody who's deaf or has difficulty with speech can call a number. There is an interpreter, and they can relay the conversation to somebody else. You pay for it, the state set it up, and that is your Title IV training. And Title V is just everything else. It talked about things like who's going to enforce this stuff, and what happens, what are the penalties, and can a person get lawyers' fees and court costs if there's a court case, and all that other lovely stuff that I hope it never gets to court and you don't have to worry about it. So these are the titles. Now let's talk about whose rights are protected. Who has a disability? That question comes up a lot, as it should. We call these the 4 prongs. I'm going to give you the definition, and then you're going to be surprised at the groups of people who are protected. The definition of disability: a significant limitation to one or more major life activities. Okay, what is significant? That depends. There's a winner on the front row. Remember what I told you? Don't be so smart. It's just 2 words. It's really easy. What you think is significant may not be significant to somebody else. And so this has a lot to do with your ability to do what you need to do. And a major life activity. What is a life activity and what is major? And the court cases that have come out of the ADA have, by and large, I'm going to say 60, 70% are about, did the person who brought the complaint rise to the level of definition of disability? How sad is that? We're going to spend all this time complaining that the person's not disabled enough, not that we actually treated them incorrectly. That's like saying, I'm going to pick on this one right here in the front because I can. I don't know your name, but let's just pretend like it's Susie. You going to be Susie? All right, so Susie, I'm her boss, and I treat her really crappy, and she decides it's because she's a woman, and so she files an EEOC complaint. I want you to imagine the attorney who files a brief stating she's not woman enough to bring the complaint. And yet you think nothing, I'm not saying you, but we think nothing of attorneys who will file a brief saying the person's not disabled enough to be disabled. It's the same thing. Thank you for letting me pick on you. Okay. I think you're woman enough. I'm just saying. I don't know you very well, but that's okay. Don't y'all go out of here and say I said she wasn't woman. All right. Now you know what a disability is. Now let's talk about the groups of people who are protected. And the first group of people are people who have a disability. As they present today to you, they have a significant limitation to a major life activity. And so they have rights under this law. You have to make sure that your program, services, and activities are as accessible to them as they are to everybody who doesn't have a significant limitation to a major life activity. If they come to me and tell me I have an obvious disability, there's 2 kinds. There's obvious and there's hidden. An obvious disability is a disability that you bring a dog with you, or a cane, or you put it in a wheelchair, or something like that. You see the person and you can tell. Then there are those of us who decided, that was too easy. So we have a disability that's hidden, and now, short of a tattoo across the forehead, we have to prove it. And you have the right to ask us to prove it up to a point. That's another discussion we have if we're doing Title I. But a person who comes in who has a significant limitation to a major life activity who claims to and needs an accommodation, and it's not an accommodation, but we're going to call it that, needs assistance for the program to be inclusive, you say yes, no problem. The second group of people who are protected are people who don't have a disability. But they used to when there's a record. Now, this primarily shows up in employment. I would imagine that because you all have access to medical records, it might show up in other ways, I don't know. But these are people who, as they present today, do not have a disability. But let's say they're cancer-free. They used to have a disability, they don't anymore. Or my cousin who has had juvenile epilepsy, used to have seizures, hasn't had a seizure since she was 16. So you could talk to her today and have absolutely no idea, and she wouldn't tell you. Let me tell you what I did before I was 16. I mean, who cares? Because she's older than I am, and nobody cares. And it wouldn't really come up except in employment, maybe. She goes in, she applies for the job, and they get her medical records, and they go, oh, we don't want to hire her. She used to have those seizures, and she has another one. Our insurance will go up. We're not going to risk it on her, because anything can happen. And that's when it comes up and we have to deal with it. So the first group of people have a disability. The second group of people don't, but they have a history. The third group of people who are protected don't have one, never did. I know it's everybody. But you think they do, and you decide to treat them negatively based upon your perception. Here's what that means. You have a situation where a person's been in a fire and they have facial scars. They have no significant limitation to a major life activity. They can see, they can walk, they can talk, they can smell, they can hear, they can do, you know what I'm talking about. But you don't hire them to be your customer service person because, they're ugly. And I say, if ugly people can't get a job, you don't have a city council. And I don't even know where you're from. A real life situation I had a lady who called me who said, now my guys back here aren't gonna like this one, but love me anyway, okay? It's for the jokes for the ladies, so hang on. True story though. We had a lady who called and said she thought that her son, who was 2 years old, had maybe been discriminated against under the ADA, didn't have a disability. But he qualified for this particular daycare. They qualified in every way. This is called otherwise qualified. So they lived in the right zip code or whatever. They could afford it. There was an opening. All the things that you have to go through when you're looking to put a child in daycare. And it worked. They said, sure. And then when she went in to fill out the paperwork, he started acting like a 2-year-old boy. Climbing around everywhere, emptying the trash can, taking the doorknob off the door, that kind of stuff. You birth boys. And the director said, obviously your child has ADHD and we're not going to take him till he's medicated. So she called me and I said, well, honey, his disability is testosterone and there's no drug. I've checked. So he was discriminated against under prong 3. Who knew? But it was somebody else's perception and somebody else's behavior. That's only 3 of the 4 groups of people who are protected by this law. The 4th group of people is called association. They don't have a disability, they never had a disability, and nobody thinks they do. But their family member has one, or the person they're with has one. This also comes up a lot in employment. I tell people with disabilities or with family members all the time, a job interview starts when you get to the receptionist desk. So you come in, you sit down, and you're just like all hairy, but you made it on time, and the little receptionist who's from the South and, offers you some sweet tea and says, So, how you doing? And you say, oh my God, I cannot believe I made it on time. I have a son with cerebral palsy and he would not put his britches on this morning. You have now just disclosed to the person who's going to decide if you have a job that you have a child with cerebral palsy. You thought you was talking to a sweet little woman behind the desk, but that's because you're not from the South and you don't know how we roll. And so when the boss finds out about it and there's two people for the position and they say, we're not going to hire the one with the GIMP kid because our insurance will go up. Oh, you think that doesn't happen? I've been in this a long time. So Mama calls me and says, have I been discriminated against? And I say, you've been discriminated against under prong 4 of the ADA. Or they find out that your husband is cancer-free and they don't want to hire you because then you may put him on the insurance and the insurance will go up and it'll be Armageddon and everything will be awful. And so these are the people whose rights are protected by this law. Those are the people that you have to think about when they're coming in. Let's say another one about the association. Let's say, and I think this is going to fit you even more, let's say that you have someone who comes in as a patient, perhaps, or a client, and they're hearing, but Mama's deaf. So the patient is the person who's hearing, but Mama's deaf. And you say, I don't have to hire a sign language interpreter because my patient isn't deaf. That's wrong. If you would talk to Mama if she was hearing, you have to talk to Mama if she's deaf, and if she needs an interpreter, you have to say yes, no problem. I get this a lot. This is way wrong. If police officers too, if you would normally talk to a person, you normally talk to that person whether that person's hearing or deaf. Doesn't matter who perpetrated the crime, it doesn't matter who's sick, it doesn't matter who the examination is for. If you would talk to the person anyway, you have to talk to the person anyway. That's where this one comes up more in your profession. So now we know whose rights are protected. Now, what's the other side of the coin? Who is responsible? Okay? Well, under Title II, it is public entities. That means both your employment, so employees with disabilities, and transit. Gaston doesn't have a whole lot of transit, but you do have access, right? This morning I filed my second and third complaint against Access, and Michael's working on it, so kudos to Michael, but right now your Access program is in violation of ADA. So he can fix it or not. I suspect he will, but you can't do that. The second thing you're responsible for is private entities. Let's talk about that. If you hire a contractor, and I don't know that any of you do, but I'm just saying, if you hire a contractor and that contractor violates the law, then it's your fault. You cannot have a written agreement with a felon. Significant assistance means that money or personnel or property of yours is going into that entity. Here's an example. We have a program in Mecklenburg County that is a private nonprofit substance abuse program. And the county gives, I don't know, $600,000 a year to this private nonprofit substance abuse program. And one day I got a call from someone saying that that private nonprofit substance abuse program was denying someone who was otherwise qualified for the program because he was deaf and was going to need a sign language interpreter. I called the executive director of the private nonprofit and I said, as I tend to do, the person who answers the phone at the front desk needs training because they lied to me. They told me that you wouldn't let somebody in because they're deaf because the interpreter would be expensive. You need to train that person not to say that. She said, but it's true. See, I always knew it was true. It's how I roll. And I went, whoa. Well, that's a violation of ADA. What are you going to do about it? The answer was, and this is a woman I know. Imagine what I do to people I don't know. And I said, you can't do that. And she said, my attorney said we can. And I said, okay, well, your attorney needs to call me. What is her expertise in civil rights? And they said, well, she's a real estate attorney. I said, good, because I'm going to own her house. So then I called the ADA and I said, well, no. And because I do respect you, I know, what would I do for people I don't know? I will give you 2 days to fix it. Well, within that 2 days, the president of the board of that agency called the president of the board of my agency. I had not called my boss and told her what had happened. So she was hearing this for the first time from the person on the other side, and just blasted away that I would do this and said, here's the story, what are you going to do about it? And my boss said, I'm going to write her up. She shouldn't have given you 2 days. She should have nailed you right then. You know. I then called the ADA coordinator for Mecklenburg County and I said, hey, Bill, how much money do y'all give X agency over here every year? And he looked up, he said $600,000. And I said, well, they're violating the rights of somebody with a disability because they won't provide a sign language interpreter. He said, got you covered. Called her up and said, we need a check. Either you get an interpreter by 3 o'clock or you write me a check by 3 o'clock. Oh my God. Anybody remember Meineke? Pay me now or pay me later. Just do it. All those great slogans for companies that make a lot of money. We use them all the time. That's what I mean. So if you have a contract with some entity that's a private entity and they screw up and you don't demand your money back, or you don't have something in your contract with them that says if you screw up, this contract is null and void, then guess what? I'm coming after you. Anybody been to the baseball stadium downtown Charlotte, BB&T, the Knights Stadium? No, I haven't. But anyway, well, I did. These are my 2 favorite stories about that. I tried to get the people that were designing it to call me because there's a lot of things that you can miss in a stadium when it comes to accessibility. Like you've got these great accessible seats, but they don't have the cup holders in front of the accessible seats like they do for everybody else, and all other kinds of stuff. And so I called the architect and I said, how about letting me look at your plans and let's go through some stuff, because I've worked on stadiums and arenas, and they said, yeah, we're good. I said, okay. So maybe a week or 2 later, I'm driving home and I'm listening to local radio station and they're talking about the new BB&T Stadium, and they were talking to a county attorney. And so I called the ADA coordinator the next day and I said, what does the county have to do with the baseball stadium? He goes, well, we own the land. So I called the county attorney. I said, Marvin, because I know everybody. I said, so here's the deal. I said, I've been trying to get the architect to talk to me, and the architect won't talk to me. So what happens if you own the land, that's property, if they build it and somebody finds that there's an ADA violation in it? And he said, contract's null and void, and right now the contract's like $1 a year, and if they screw up and the contract's void, they'll have to pay us full price. I said, okay, good. 3 days later, I got a call from the architect. Would you like to come look at our plans? I said, well, if you insist. And the other favorite story was they did let me, and they let me work on it, and I worked on it several times, and the day before it opened, I went over there to do a survey. Now, this is my favorite story. So I got to go into everything. I got to go into the locker rooms, and there was nobody in there, but I got to go to the locker rooms, and I got to see all the bowels of the building and all the offices and everything. And I've got this whole gaggle of people with me because they're scared I'm going to find something. And I'm walking along, and all of a sudden I stopped and laughed out loud and whipped out my cell phone. And I said, "How much you all pay me not to take a picture of that?" And they said, "What?" Well, it was the door into the umpire's changing room, and it was in Braille. Some Braille manufacturer really pulled something over on them. I said, "I'm going to take a picture of this and give it to the guy that does the Jumbotron, so every time the umpire screws up, they can just flash that up there." This is how Title II entities can get screwed up by Title III entities. So y'all need to be aware of that. And I'm not talking about federal entities. Do not tell me that the post office does not have accessible parking. I do not care, and I cannot fix it. Well, I can fix it, but not under ADA. So here's the basic rule under ADA Title II. You know it, but now I'm going to say it to you again. All programs, services, and activities, all programs, activities, and services, apparently I wrote it differently, provided or operated by you, is available to everybody. Right? So we've got a situation right now in another county where there's a building. Remember I told you that other H word? There's all kinds of requirements around things that are old that does not make them historic. And even if something is historic, you can still make it accessible in some circumstances. But there's an old building in another county that's owned by a municipality, and there's one restroom and it's upstairs, and there's no elevator, and the bathroom isn't accessible if you could get to it anyway. So I called them up and I said, "You got to stop having programs there until you fix it." And they said, "Well, this is not a problem. There's a gas station across the street, and we just tell people go there." I said, "Sweet. Lock the door. Everybody goes across the street to use the toilet at the rest stop, and I'm good." It's everybody or nobody. So if anybody gets to do it, everybody gets to do it. That's just the way it is. Now, how are you going to make sure all these things about the ADA, that Gaston County is compliant? Well, there's a position called the ADA coordinator. Now, and Ken Henderson is your ADA coordinator for Gaston County. But what Ken knows, and what a lot of ADA coordinators know, is there's a lot of moving parts in Gaston County. And he really does not want to be responsible for each and every one of you. So he has found a position that we recommend to any large municipality, and he has taken it to heart. It's called an ADA liaison position. So he gets to look at his departments and say, "I tell you what, I want an ADA liaison in Parks and Recreation. I want an ADA liaison at the Health Department. I want an ADA liaison at the Sheriff's Department. I want an ADA liaison in Transportation. I want an ADA liaison at the school system," because the county gives money to the schools, but who wants to be responsible for the schools? Don't tell anybody I said that. And so he has assisted in identifying people in each department who are trained, who come to training. I do training once a quarter in Gaston County and once a month in Charlotte, if you don't mind coming across through the Belmont Tunnel to get to us. Who's old enough to remember the Belmont Tunnel? Oh, yay, one. We used to laugh and say if we were late somewhere that we were going to Gastonia, but we got stuck in the Belmont Tunnel. It was a joke. Anyway. And so we provide training all year long, free, for people to come and learn about this stuff, so that there'll be somebody I can call when I get these complaints. And they're the ones that make sure that there is no violation. If you don't know what to do and you want some training, you can find out who your ADA liaison is in your department and ask them to give you some training or to get me to come and do some training. because Gaston County is only as protected as its weakest link. Okay? I got a call. I get a lot of calls because I'm old. People have referred to me, if there's somebody in the state, especially Western North Carolina, but sometimes down east too, and they file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights. Remember I told you this was civil rights? So if somebody comes to you and says, I need a sign language interpreter, and you don't say yes, no problem, the person has the right to file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights. And we all know how much fun it is when the feds show up. And so what happens is, a lot of times, the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights will refer the complainer to me and my agency to try to mediate it locally because they're a little busy up there. And one of the reasons that I took the training I took and became an ADA coordinator, certified coordinator, and spent 5 days in a room with 2 DOJ attorneys was so I could do their job for them. I don't get their money, I just do their job for them. But they will refer people to us. I just got a call this morning from somebody in Charlotte who said, somebody in Washington recommended I call you. So we've been all over the state when there have been these kinds of issues. And I got a call from the safety and risk manager for the town of Hickory years ago because a woman who is blind or low vision, I can't remember now, went into the library, went up to one of the people at the library desk and said, I need some help finding this book. And the person behind the desk said, I don't have time to do that. We can't help you right now. So this woman filed a federal complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights, and they told the person from the city of Hickory, who was the ADA coordinator, to call me. And so part of the punishment that the city was under is that all the department heads had to come to training that I gave. That'll learn you. And I just got a call this morning from somebody, and it's very interesting. We do a lot of stuff in my agency. And one of the things we do is we do individual advocacy, that's what we call it. When somebody with a disability calls in, they wind up talking to a different staff member who we have who's an attorney. And so I get the training opportunities like this, and she does the individual stuff. And so I staff with her when things are coming up. And I went into her this morning and I said, oh, I just got an interesting phone call. I've been asked to come next Tuesday to do a 2.5-hour training on employment issues under ADA Title I to this shall remain nameless large employer in Charlotte. And she looked at me, she said, you're welcome. She had gotten the call from the employee who had been discriminated against. And she had been going up the ladder at this company, and she had gotten to somebody who said, you're going to have to get training, and gave them the number in Washington to call to find a qualified trainer, and wound up getting me, and I'm 2 doors down from her in the same hall. And the interesting piece about that is she didn't give my name. And they could have recommended some other people. There's some people in other parts of the state that could have done it too. But now what's going to happen is we're going to provide the training, but we're going to know enough that we're not going to just be talking, I'm not going to mention the employee's name, but we're not going to be talking generalities and could-be's and would-be's. There's going to be enough information that people are going to understand what they did wrong without it ever going to EEOC or anything like that. So that's kind of how we do. Let's talk about when you have somebody who has a sensory disability. Disabilities fall into different categories. Mobility, I would imagine you know what that means, getting around. There is mental illness. There is cognition. There is sensory, which is what we're going to talk about here in a minute. There is systemic, and that's something like lupus or MS or renal failure that's just all in your system, HIV/AIDS. And then the last category is multiple. You can fit 2 of those categories. You can be blind and be HIV positive, which puts you in 2 of the categories. If you're blind and deaf, you're just in 1 category. So you can be cross-cat. Remember back in the day we called it cross-cat? Anybody? Cross-categorized. Okay. So when you have someone who has a communication disability, that is a hearing disability, a vision disability, or a speaking disability. Now, you're going to say, I remember when I was in 5th grade and speech is not one of the senses. I know. You're just going to have to know that Congress did this. So those are the 3 communication categories: vision, hearing, and speech. And the law says, and the general requirement is, you have to ensure that the communication you have with those folks is as effective or equally effective to the communication you have with people who don't have that disability. One of the key words in there is ensure. So as I go through this, I'm going to let you go to school on some people who have not done that so well. You may have to provide auxiliary aids or services. That means auxiliary aids are things, auxiliary services are people. So you might have to provide Braille. You might have to provide assisted listening systems. You all right now are being accommodated by me using a microphone. And I have a feeling it wasn't done because anybody requested an auxiliary aid, but this is an auxiliary aid. It may be any number of other things. It could be computer-assisted note-taking, whatever. Those are auxiliary aids. Auxiliary services are done by people. You have sign language interpreters. You have audio describers. A sign language interpreter, you know what that is. An audio describer is like a sign language interpreter, but it's for people who are blind. I'm a professional audio describer. I'm also a professional interpreter. I have no life. I'm everywhere all the time. Any Star Trek fans? I'm Q. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. And so what that means is that I can go to the NASCAR Hall of Fame with a person who's blind, and I can describe it to the point that they feel like that they've been to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Describe what they can't see. I describe live theater. I've described Les Miserables and, oh, my favorite, Riverdance. Kick, kick, left, kick, kick, right. No. It has to be as effective as what the other people can see. I've audio described ballet. I've audio described opera. I've been doing it since 2002. And people who are blind are beginning to understand that this is something they can ask for. So if you need audio description, if somebody asks for it, then you just call my agency and we'll tell you how to make it happen. Here's what you have to do that makes you, one of the places that makes you different from a business. Because you've ticked off Congress since 1973, they have something in here called primary consideration. That means when the person with the communication disability comes to you and tells you the method of communication they want or need, you say yes, no problem. There's no discussion. This is not a debate. This is not a negotiation. This is a yes, no problem. If that same person goes to the bank, which is a Title III entity, and says, I need a loan and I want to talk to a loan officer and I need a sign language interpreter, the bank has the right to negotiate the method of communication. Now, they may wind up with the sign language interpreter if that's what the person wants, but there is a discussion. Would anything else work? But you don't have that luxury. You have to say yes, no problem. Primary consideration doesn't mean I'd like you to hire Joe, please. He's easy to look at when I'm getting an interpreter. No. But an American Sign Language interpreter is what they need. Let me tell you something about sign language that you may not know. Sign language is not a code. Morse code is a code. Braille is a code. Semaphore, I hope somebody knows what that is. Yay! You and me, man. If you're not married, I see you after work. He's the only one that's been doing what I've been doing. Is your wife here? What a lucky woman you are. Why aren't you sitting together? I also do therapy. I'm just telling you, honey, he's a keeper. Those are codes. Sign language is not a code. Sign language is not English on the hands. People think that there is a sign for every English word because they've never heard it before. And so they assume, like with Braille, it's word, 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 word. No, it's not. Because Braille is not called Braille language, and Morse code is not called Morse language, but American Sign Language is called language because it's a language. It is not English. It is more, the syntax of American Sign Language is closer to French or Russian than it is to English. And I'm going to tell you American Sign Language because you've never heard it. And because you think, I can just write this on a piece of paper and they can read it. No, no. Because I am a sign language interpreter, so I can tell you. So I'm going to tell you that if one of you gets a person who's deaf who says, you know, I've lost my food stamps. I just use that for every example I have. And you want to say, where were you when you lost your food stamps? I'm a sign language interpreter. If you hired me, this is what it would take for me to get the answer for you. So you're going to be deaf, okay? So I'm going to look at you. Yeah, just it means you don't have to do anything. Like a state employee, just sit there and get paid. Okay, so now I can keep, okay, I've ticked off this side of the room, the woman and her husband, all the guys. I'm getting there. All the state employees, yeah. So what I would have to do, as you're saying, you know, where were you when you lost your food stamps? That is a complicated question for somebody whose primary language is American Sign Language. Not because they're stupid, they're smarter than you are, they know 2 languages. But because in American Sign Language, the most important thing that you can establish is the timing. And you said when. If you wrote on a piece of paper, where were you when you lost your food stamps, they would write back Wednesday. You asked them when. And time is the first thing you answer. So I would say to her in her language, and this is what it would sound like, and trust me, it works. True Biz food stamp lost you? Yes, no? See, look at her. She understood it. She nodded. I'd say, sorry, sad. Happened when? Wednesday. Oh my. Where? Remember where? Bus stop. Bus stop. And if you can't do that, you need an interpreter. And that's just a small, easy one. So anybody who thinks that you can write to a deaf person has to be able to write in sign language. Know the syntax. Write it that way, or they won't get it. Somebody asked me one time, do deaf people text? I said, yes, in sign language. And I'll get a text from a deaf person, I have to stand there and sign it to myself to know what it means. Because it's not English, it's words, and I have to sign it in order. Oh, gotcha. And that's not because they're stupid. Like I said, they are bilingual. And if you're not, there you go. Now, deaf people are not expensive. Did I tick off all the non-bilingual people? But sign language, deaf people are not expensive. People say, oh my gosh, those deaf people are so expensive. Let me tell you something. No, because every deaf person who comes into my office costs me $0. Because I can communicate with them. They bring their same deafness into my office that they bring into your office. You've chosen not to learn their language. Here's your punishment. It's not them, it's you. And the other thing is, the interpreter's not there for them. The interpreter's there for y'all. All y'all. Okay, now ticked off the Yankees. This is good. Because, look at him waving, like I wouldn't have figured it out. Hike the car in the yard. That's all I can say in Yankee. I'm trilingual. So the idea is the interpreter's not there just for them. The interpreter's there for you too. Because promise you, you don't understand what they're saying and they don't understand what you're saying. It's not that you're just going to have a speech. I imagine you want some response. Well, now you're saying, well, I have to hire an interpreter for this deaf person. No, you have to hire an interpreter to have effective communication. Communication, here's the other thing, people. Communication is not the responsibility of the sender. It is the responsibility of the receiver. I'm going to prove it to you. So what if I said to you, meet me in my office right after lunch? What time would you show up? Oh, I didn't say after your lunch. But meet me right after, okay? Maybe I did mean your lunch. You want to risk it? You don't know what I mean. You heard every word I said. Even the table back there understood it. But you don't know the intent. You don't know when I eat lunch and my definition of right after. And if you don't ask me, then I assume you understand because I said it and it made perfectly good sense in my head. So it's your job to ask. All communication falls apart because of the person doesn't ask, not because of what the person says. The next time you say to your boss, you and I don't communicate, guess what that means? You don't ask enough questions. Being from the South, when I was in college, I had a guy ask if he could take me out to Sunday dinner. Sunday dinner. Sunday dinner's 12 o'clock and it's chicken. Yes. Chicken. So I got ready and I went somewhere and I was ready at 12 o'clock and he wasn't there, so I went and found my own chicken. And he showed up at 6 o'clock and I said, what are you doing here? He said, I'm here for Sunday dinner. I said, it was 12 o'clock and chicken, and now it's supper and it's bologna sandwiches. Not because I didn't understand his words. He said it in English. I just didn't know what he meant, and I didn't ask. We only get into communication problems because we make assumptions. True story, there is, in the annals of North Carolina jurisprudence, there was a situation where there was a man who's deaf. He was in his teens. He was having a serious medical situation. Doctor didn't have an interpreter. Didn't need one because, we'll just write back and forth. And after all these things that they were trying to figure out what the problem was, the doctor finally prescribed a medication, and he said, you need to know that one of the rare side effects of this medication is it could make you sterile. But he wrote on a piece of paper, and the deaf man looked at it, and he thought, well, I know sterile means really clean, like a bottle of alcohol, and I don't mind being clean. This is a true story. So years later, when the fertility doctors were trying to figure out why he and his wife couldn't get pregnant, and they found out he had taken this medication, he realized he didn't know what that meant. He assumed he knew because he'd only seen the word sterile one time. And so when you say, I can write it, that's not going to work for somebody who's deaf. Now let's talk about one of the strangest things that's come along in the ADA legacy. I get a lot of questions about service animals, and that's the reason that I want to share this with you. This is new. This went into effect March the 15th, 2012. So anything that you thought you knew about service animals before that, start new. This went into effect March the 15th of 2012. I don't know what your policies are on service animals where you work. If you don't either, you need to find out. And you need to know what you can and cannot say. You are a Title II entity that is governed by the Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Justice. They defined service animal in 2012. This is not the same definition of service animal as an apartment complex, because that's fair housing, or a school, because that's IDEA, or work, because that's employment, or even the bus or a cab, because that's transportation. This is why I make the big bucks. I have to remember all, or an airplane, because that's the Air Carriers Access Act. So I can have my service animal in my apartment, at my job, in a cab, and on an airplane, my emotional support ferret. I just can't take it on the sidewalk or in the airport. Gino. Okay. So here's what the law said. It has to be a dog. Any breed. Somebody comes in with a pit bull and says, this is my service animal, I'm going to tell you how to fix that. Not the dog, your attitude. It's not that kind of a class. Or a miniature horse. Your tax dollars at work. What do I mean by that? This is a miniature horse. Oh, I know. I just throw this in here to wake y'all up. It's been an hour. I'm not talking about a pony. I'm talking about a miniature horse. Y'all seen the commercial, the Amazon commercial, where she gets the doggy door for the horse to come in? That's a miniature horse. It's the size of a lab or the size of a German Shepherd. It's not going to get any bigger. Now, the reason miniature horses, this concept came up at North Carolina State University. Any of y'all that know what this is. North Carolina State University, that's a wolf pack. What's the matter with you people? Yes? No? Go Tar Heels? I don't know where y'all are. It's a college. It started at North Carolina State University, and there's 3 reasons why they decided that miniature horses could be good for people with disabilities. Number 1, they live longer than dogs and can last longer in their job. Imagine that you have a service animal that's been trained and they go with you everywhere and you depend on them for your life, and then 7 years later you got to get another one. Now, those of you who've been married more than 7 years think that's not a bad deal. Check off the old people that have been married a long time. Check off the happily married people. But that can be devastating. If you're 18 years old and you get a service animal and you have to get a new dog every 7 years, that's a lot of responsibility. So miniature horses can go longer. The second reason is because they are hypoallergenic. Now, if you're blind and allergic to dogs, that is karma on a cracker right there. So this will keep you from having that problem. The other thing is, there are cultures and religions that do not touch dogs. And so miniature horses can work on that. So this is what it is. Now somebody's going to ask after I'm left, well, what about those little capuchin monkeys? Say, they didn't have a lobby. So if somebody wants to bring in a dog, wants to bring in their service animal, it has to be a dog or a miniature horse, and it will be under the owner's control at all times. This is the piece that even people with service animals don't know. But you say to the person who comes into your office with a pit bull on a leash, the first thing you say is, oh, write this down, this is precious. The first thing you say is, what's up with the dog? People ask me all the time, I don't know how to ask. What's up with the dog? I mean, what's up with the horse just sounds stupid. But what's up with the dog? And then they're going to say, this is my service animal. Now, they could be telling the truth, they could be lying. And you say, so you don't ask a question, you make a statement. So, this animal has been trained to do something for you that you can't do for yourself because you have a disability. They're going to lie and say, uh-huh. And then you're going to say, and it's going to behave like a service animal. It's not a question, it's a statement. Now, people who are lying don't know what that means. And that's where you got them. And then they'll say, yeah, and you say, all right, but if it doesn't, you're both out of here. Because it is under the owner's control at all times. It doesn't pee or poop or bark or hump or sniff without your permission. Get the animal lovers now. All right? So, the second that dog barks, when the owner is not about to be attacked, out of here. Because you don't have an animal in there that's not under the owner's control at all times. And people don't know this. And I got a call not long ago from a woman who runs a hotel down the eastern part of the state. She said, we got a problem down here. She said, we got this man, and he travels through here sometimes for work, and he brings in this little yappy dog. And we have a no pet policy, but he brings it every time he comes through, and he says it's a service animal, and then he leaves it in the hotel and goes to whatever the job is that day, and it barks all day long. And she said, and it's been happening, and we don't know what to do, and the last time we came in, we told him that it was a problem, and he said it was a service animal, and if we kicked him out, he would sue. And she said, and now we just don't know what to do. So we called the Department of Justice, and they told me to call you. And I said, well, here's what you do. You say, what's up with the dog? And he's going to say, this is my service animal. And you're going to say, so this dog performs a service for you. You can't perform for yourself because you have a disability. He's going to say yes. You're going to say, and it knows to act like a service animal. And he's going to say yes. And then, if it barks without his permission, you kick him out. You can keep the man, but kick out the dog. I'm a dog lover, I'm just telling you. And if he doesn't want to hear it, you have him call me. She said, well, he's supposed to check in at 3 o'clock. I said, well, I'll be here. So 10 minutes till 3, I get a call from a very irate man who said, I understand I can't get a room in this hotel unless you give me permission. I love being queen of the forest. And I said, well, tell me your situation, like I didn't know who he was. And he starts telling me the story, and I said, well, what's up with the dog? I practice what I preach. And he told me, and I said, well, does it perform a service for you? You can't perform for yourself because you have a disability? Yes. I said, okay. Does it behave like a service animal? What? I said, well, is it with you at all times and it doesn't pee or poop or hump or sniff or bark without your permission? Well, I have to leave it here when I go out. I said, sir, let's back up. This dog does something for you you can't do for yourself because you have a disability. That means it's got to be with you 24/7. Well, I can't take the dog with me. I said, you got a problem. He said, why has nobody ever told me this before? I said, I don't know. But I'm telling you now. And he was absolutely astonished. And I don't know whether it was a service animal or not, but I do know that he doesn't have to stay there unless he takes the dog with him. And he said, well, my sister lives in town. Maybe I'll have her come over and watch the dog. I said, does this dog perform a service for you you can't perform for yourself because you have a disability? Then the only way this is going to work is if you leave your disability in the room with the dog. Stupid people. One of my favorite calls I got was from a guy who's, I get these great calls. One of the greatest calls I got was from a guy who's from Jacksonville, Florida. He's been on my mind today with the floods. And calls me up, and if I ever write a memoir, it's going to be the title of this book. It's going to be what he said to me. I said, hello, this is Julia Sain. He said, are you the ADA lady? I said, yeah. And he said, have you ever seen a horse squat? That's going to be the title of my autobiography. And I said, sir, I was raised on a farm. I've seen a horse do a lot of things. You're going to have to be more specific. He said, well, we've got this lady down here. She has this miniature horse as her service animal. I said, oh, cool. He goes, I own a movie theater. Now, dogs, when they come into the movie theater, person sits down, the dog sits on their feet. You ever seen a horse squat? Oh, we're back to that now. I understand the question. He said, what am I supposed to do with this horse? And I said, well, do you have fully accessible, integrated, and companion seating in your theater? Which is required, by the way. Now, accessible seating is a whole. It's a space, it's a whole, right? And then you have a seat next to it for the companion, but the accessible seat is a whole. And I said, do you have accessible seating with a companion seating? He said, yeah. And I said, put the woman in the chair, put the horse in the hole. He goes, oh my gosh, I can do that. You're welcome. So this is a service animal thing. If you have people who come in and they're bringing in an emotional support ferret, do you see ferret on this list? We had a guy from South Carolina, which tells you something. Now, have I ticked off the South Carolina people? We have a guy from South Carolina, and he has a sugar glider. Anybody know what this is? It's like a little rat. It's a cute little rat. Feel free to look it up. Not now, millennials. Wait a minute. And he keeps it in his pocket, and it keeps him from killing people. And I'm happy about that for all his neighbors. But he was coming to Charlotte to the hospital for surgery, and he wanted the doctor to give him permission to check in 2 days early so his sugar glider could get used to the place. You see sugar glider on this list? So I don't know if you have issues with service animals, but you will. And if you do, and you try this and it doesn't work, you can call me. There are some excuses. I'll call them defenses because that's what the law calls them. But there are certain legal excuses to not providing access. Number one is it's a fundamental alteration of the goods and services you provide. If you wanted to tell me that you can't provide an interpreter or you can't provide access or something, and you want to use this as a defense, you're going to have to convince me that using an interpreter or building a ramp is going to fundamentally alter what you do. So here's an example of that. What does a shoe store do? No. All you people who said sell shoes, you're wrong. Shoe stores sell pairs of shoes. And so it, what? Yes. And so You can't go in and I'll have one of those and throw in the, and so an amputee goes into a shoe store, shouldn't expect to get one shoe for half price. Because it would fundamentally alter what they do. My best suggestion to him is find a guy with the other foot the same size. Y'all hang out at your amputee meetings. You know, compare sizes. That's what guys do anyway. I can't help it they chose not to sit in the front. They missed that last joke. That's on them. Or the Shield Museum. I had this conversation. They called me from the Shield Museum and said, we have, don't they have a planetarium at the Shield Museum? See, I remembered this. And so they said, we have a group of kids coming in from a school and they have a child who's deaf and they want to watch the planetarium and they want to leave the lights on because there'll be a sign language interpreter. I said, well, I believe that'd be a fundamental alteration of dark. Just saying. So if you want to not provide it, you have to convince me that it would be a fundamental alteration of the goods and services that you provide. The second reason is that it would be an undue burden, either financial or of administrative. You cannot, as a Title II entity, pray to convince me that it is an undue financial burden because you can raise taxes. Maybe not you, but the municipality can. It chooses not to. See how easy it is when you've already made a choice? People say to me, what should I do? I mean, people ask me all the time about having an automatic door opener. The law doesn't require you to have an automatic door opener, but the law requires that everybody who goes through that door has to be able to go through it equally effectively. So I say, no, you don't have to have an automatic door opener. You can hire a doorman. They do it up north all the time. And they say, I'm not going to do that. And I say, see how easy it is when you eliminate all your other choices? So it would have to be an undue administrative burden, which means that it would be like having two people do one job, something like that. So if you want to say no, you're going to have to tell me it would be an undue administrative burden. And the third thing is the other H word, historic properties. I've already told you about that. Just because it's old, I had somebody tell me they didn't have to fix this building because it was old. And I said, well, they put a ramp to Monticello and an elevator in the Lincoln Memorial. Go. Your piddling little old store ain't nothing to me. So we now have 6 minutes for you to ask questions. Yes, ma'am. Excellent question. I'll repeat the question. She said, what do we do if we have a patient who's deaf and we've provided the interpreter because we know what to do? That's not what you said, but that's what you meant. And the private doctor said, well, make sure she brings her own interpreter. Well, you need to say to that person, you're a special kind of crazy, aren't you? No, don't say that. You get to say, well, you know that's illegal, right? Because they don't bring their own interpreter. Let me tell you something. I don't trust anybody who brings their own anything. I don't even like buffets or dinners at the church. I don't know what they put in that. But I want you to imagine bringing their own interpreter, really? Can you imagine a mother who's hearing signing for her daughter who's come in for an STD check? There is lying all in that room going on. I swear it's immaculate STD. Nuh-uh. So remember I said ensure was the key word? I got a call from Rowan County. I don't know if it was DSS or Health Department, doesn't matter, Rowan County. And they said, we have a policy that the person has to bring their own interpreter. And I said, well, you need to have your attorney call me because y'all are in a world of hurt. I said, did your mama go to you with your first STD appointment? I said to the woman, I don't know. And would she have told you the truth? And it was DSS because I said, I want you to imagine a woman who's, a child who's deaf, maybe 15, 16 years old and about to get that check and goes to DSS and the DSS worker says something about, I need to talk to you about whether or not you need a guardian, and mama turns around and says, she says you need a guardian. They have asked people who were deaf whether or not, they've asked the parent who is the hearing person to interpret to the deaf child, does your mother abuse you? And mama's interpreting. So the doctors don't know what they're doing if they say bring your own interpreter. I don't trust anybody who brings their own anything. No, they can't refuse it. The only way they can refuse it is if they normally aren't taking new patients, or the discipline is one that they don't do. You know, like I need cancer screening, so I'm going to go to a podiatrist. I mean, that, you know, the podiatrist says, I'm not that kind of doctor. But if they are taking new patients, or if that is their discipline, then this is a price of doing business. They don't have to like it. And they'll say, we've had deaf people for years and gotten away with it. And I said, so the last time, or hadn't provided an interpreter, and I say, officer, I drive down this road doing 30 miles over the speed limit every day. How dare you stop me now? It's the same thing for doctors as it. Not now, there's only one language that's connected to disability, and that's the American Sign Language. If you're asking about Spanish or French or German, that's not my area of expertise. I'm only talking about American Sign Language because that's the only language that somebody has because of a disability. So ensure, like I told the woman from Rowan County, your obligation is to ensure effective communication. And if you use some jackleg off the street you've never met, how did you ensure effective communication? You're welcome. I still got a minute and a half. You want me to tell you about the accessible stage at the strip club? It's going in the book. Now I got a call from an architect. He was getting ready to design a gentleman's club up in Iredell County. You know. And he said, I need to know if there needs to be a ramp to the stage. So what did I answer? It depends. I said, do you have amateur night? Well, think about it. And he said, I don't think so. I said, then it's a Title I issue and you don't have to worry about it until you hire the stripper who is in a wheelchair. And then I have a lady on staff who's an amputee, and I went up to her and I said, hey, Vivian, I can get you a job in Iredell County. Because when they holler, take it off, you unplug that leg and let it go. But then you have to put Braille on the pole, and it just gets real expensive. All right, now I've insulted everybody, and I can leave. Thank you very much.